Good evening. I want to welcome everyone to the regular meeting of the Planning and Transportation Commission, and we also have guests tonight from the Human Relations Commission. So welcome all of you. Could you please call the roll?
Chair Suma?
Here.
Commissioner Aiken?
Here.
Vice Chair Chang?
Here.
Commissioner Heckman?
Present.
Commissioner Liu?
Here.
Commissioner Templeton?
Here.
We have a PTC quorum.
Thank you. Would you like to call the roll of the Human Relations Commission?
Yes. Chair Smith? Vice Chair Everly?
Here.
Commissioner Causey?
Here.
Commissioner Kraus?
Here.
Commissioner Shea?
Here.
For present, we have a quorum.
Thank you so much. And just to welcome our guests again and let you know that Chair Smith will be here in about half an hour, I think. So we will move on now to the public comment period. That's for anyone who wants to make a comment that is not an item not on the agenda. Ms. Dow?
I have not received any speaker cards or raised hands.
Okay, we'll move on then. Deletions? My thing is up.
Yes, I offer that we could take city official reports after we complete our session with the Human Relations Commission, since that's pertaining to the PTC matters.
That would be fine with me. Okay, so we will move right on to our study session then. So staff has a report.
Good evening. Gotta get myself situated here. Good evening, members of the PTC and the Human Relations Commission. Rachel Tanner. Last time I was probably before the PTC was as Assistant Director of Planning and Development Services, but I've returned in a limited term role as a management specialist with the department, working on certain projects like the safe parking project that is before you. And I want to thank Ms. Dow. She, I think, is going to share the screen with the presentation. Just have a brief staff presentation that highlights some of the things you saw in the staff report, and then invite comments, questions from commissioners, as well as public comment.
Okay, welcome back, Ms. Tanner. And I wanted to let everyone know that after this item is completed, we'll take a little short 10-minute break to let everybody resituate. And if the Human Relations Commissioners would like to stay and view the rest of the meeting, we'd love to have you here. Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you. So just want to start out with a little bit of why we're having a joint session. We don't often have a joint hearing, so want to thank all of you for accommodating an earlier start time and for the HRC, a date that you don't normally come to City Hall. So thank you for being here. Part of it was that is this working? Okay. Part of the idea is that, we were going to take this item to the HRC for comment and then to the PTC for comment and recommendation to council. But instead of having it sequentially, the idea would be to have the conversation together so that the PTC and the HRC benefit from hearing and learning from each other and sharing, and staff as well. And then if the PTC does make a motion tonight, it really can encompass, and the report to council can encompass the full conversation that is had. So that's the reason for the joint session tonight. I'm going to start by going over some of the program background and the services that are associated with the safe parking programs at congregations in Palo Alto. Next slide. So first, just to remind us what safe parking is. The safe parking programs provide parking lots where unhoused program participants who are dwelling in their vehicles can park. They can become connected to services, and ultimately they can find secure and stable housing. And this program was developed due to the needs of unhoused Palo Altans. And I should add that another feature of not just a parking space in a parking lot that's designated and hopefully has some more measures of safety than just parking somewhere on the street. They also have access to restroom facilities, hand washing facilities, and again, connection to services. Next slide. So there are two types of programs that provide safe parking overall in Palo Alto. One are the congregation-based safe parking programs. So these are at religious institutions or churches. And then the 24-hour program, which is on publicly owned lots. So you can see here in the table one on the right is showing the 4 congregations that have safe parking programs in Palo Alto. And you can see when they first submitted the date for their first permit, and then when that permit was approved. So we have safe parking programs in operation going all the way back, the first one in March of 2021, and then most recently in June 2023, approved the most recent permit. And you can see here just a map of the 4 congregations as well as the 24-hour lot. The 24-hour lot is at 2000 Gang Road. And so you can see that kind of in the northern portion there near the Baylands. Next slide. This table shows the participants in the placements associated with those participants. So you can see again the congregations listed there: Highway, Unitarian Universalist, First Congregational. And then you'll notice that Congregation Itzayim doesn't have anything listed because they just started. The data is still a little too fresh to really report on their program. But this is going up all the way back, really the entirety of the program up to June of this year. And we did ask if there were any significant updates from the June 30th date, and there hasn't been. Again, these programs are quite small, and so there haven't been a lot of updates. Just to remind the parameters, these are programs that can house up to 4 vehicles. So there may be more than one person sheltering in a vehicle. So that's why you can have the number of unique clients, but you also have the number of households. So you can understand kind of how the persons are spread. Are they individuals, couples, are they families? And so you can see the unique number of clients that have been served. So a total of 37 unique clients in 25 households. And you can see positive placements. Again, you may recall from the staff report, positive placement is that the person is leaving to a place that is designed for human habitation, whether that be an affordable housing unit, maybe they're going to live with friends or family and reconnecting with loved ones, perhaps they're going to another rapid rehousing or other type of program, but it is permanent and secure and safe housing, versus a non-positive placement would be maybe they're continuing to live in their vehicle but have left the program or have decided to live in a different type of location but not participate in the program anymore. And so you can see we've had 17 placements overall and it's of the clients. So that's of the 37 individual clients, 17 of those clients have been have gone on to a positive placement. So it's about a 45% overall positive placement route. And then I just want to note in the county in FY23, this would be an attachment. I think it's attachment B that you all had that had some of the diagrams around some of the data that in the county overall, it's about 34% of the participants in FY23 exited to housing, and in FY22, about 14% exited to housing. So we're seeing, I think, relatively, again, it's a very small group of individuals and households, but we're seeing relatively good performance compared to the county as a whole, which obviously is a much bigger universe to be looking at. And then just draw your attention to the last box, the point in time count, again, just to kind of get a sense of the scale and scope. At the last point in time count, 206 unsheltered folks or unhoused folks were counted, 187 of them unsheltered, and of those 187, 181 were sleeping in vehicles. And the vast majority of the vehicles folks are sheltering in are RVs versus passenger vehicles. For the most part, these congregation-based programs serve passenger vehicles, so a car, maybe a regular SUV, but not the larger SUVs that you may sometimes see parked in parts of the city. The 24-hour lot does, however, serve those who are living in RVs. Next slide. And this is, again, similar information, but just also adding in the Gang Road site at the bottom. So that is the 24-hour lot. So again, you can see kind of the placements and that this adds also kind of a showing where the households are affiliated with Palo Alto. So again, we have a discussion around whether or not we want to have preferences in this program. And so you can see that we are tracking, are folks connected to Palo Alto in some way? Is that somehow where they would see themselves as maybe their last residence? Maybe they have a job here. Maybe they're in school here. And then overall, the number of nights provided and the occupancy rate at the congregation and the 24-hour lot. So again, it's not necessarily even. Certainly the congregations haven't all been in operation the entire duration of this period of time. But again, this gives you a sense of the scale and the scope. Obviously, the Gang Road site is 24 hours. It's served 84 individuals in this time. It makes sense because it can serve up to 12 RVs, and each RV may have more individuals living there than in a vehicle. Next slide. Now on to the draft ordinance that is before you and kind of what the proposed policy changes are. Next slide. So I'm just going to voice over these, but certainly we can go back to them if there's any that you'll have questions on or want to make further comments on. These are a few of the policy changes. The first is the permit duration. The pilot program had kind of a 90-day kind of initial period and then an extension, and then you would need to come back and reapply to renew your permit. So this is much more like other conditional uses that we have in the city, where once you apply for it, and we say that we believe that you meet the criteria, you have that permit, unless and until either it's revoked due to not following the conditions of approval, there's a change of ownership, this permit is not transferable, or if the use is abandoned. So if the church decided, hey, we don't want to do this anymore, and then 5 years later, maybe the congregation changed its mind, they would need to come back in and get a new permit for that, because too much time would have passed between the operation. But essentially, we're saying the trial period showed, again, no news is good news. During this entire pilot period, we really haven't had any complaints, and so we feel pretty confident we've dialed things in. We have had for each of the congregations that has gone through this process, we ended up hosting as the city a community meeting, a neighborhood check-in to let folks know what was going on, to ask questions, very productive meetings. And so we're explicitly allowing the authority of the director to host that meeting instead of leaving it up to guesswork. Could they not? And typically we've been doing it, so we might as well state that that's part of the plan typically, that we would be hosting that. And then again, you can see on the right side of the screen the preferences. Again, this is a proposal to essentially say that these 4 categories would have preference if essentially push comes to shove. If we start getting too much demand for the spots we have, that we would give preferences for the Palo Alto spots for persons who fall in this category. Again, I want to note that the county and the program provider here in Palo Alto is not super in favor of this this preference, in part because it's maybe not needed. We just haven't had a situation where we've had more people than we had parking spots available. And also just they feel that they do already vet folks to try to put them in the placement that's going to be best for them. So if somebody works in Palo Alto, they want to put them here in Palo Alto so they can get to their job easily. If likewise somebody might have connected with them here, but maybe they're actually better placed in a different community that's closer to the things that they normally do on a day-to-day basis. And so they kind of feel, again, maybe it's a solution in search of a problem. But I will say that when we do our community meetings, this topic often does come up of like, how do we know that we're going to be serving our folks in our community and making sure that this program is providing help to them? So I can certainly see both sides and bring it to you all for consideration. Next slide. So in the proposed policy, we also are proposing to keep the appeal distance the same. It's about 600 feet. So that means that within that 600 feet radius is where we mail notices to owners and occupants that there's a proposal for a safe parking program within your 600-foot radius of that. And that's also the folks who can file an appeal if they're concerned about the program. We're continuing to propose that there's no fee charged for this. It does not, thankfully, take very much staff time to approve, and it's one way the city can help to not provide a ton of financial resources, but certainly not burden these programs any further. And then some minor operational changes, really that again align with what the operator has been doing. And so we've often put these into our conditions of approval because it happens through the negotiation process. And so again, instead of having to go through that process, let's just put it there. It's already black and white. These will be conditions of approval. Again, there are things that are already happening. And I think probably the most, I shouldn't say the most important one, the one that's the newest is the annual reporting, just asking for an annual report, and it lists the data that we'd like to have so that we can really, again, continue to get a sense of how the program's operating and are we meeting the needs of the community. Next slide. So that is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to be available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. If any commissioners have any clarifying questions, we can take those and then we'll go to public comment and then back to the commission. I see Commissioner Aiken and Commissioner Chang.
Thank you, Chair Simon. So a couple of questions came up as I was reading the material. Number one, what are the concerns about serving RVs in the congregation-based sites?
So I would say they probably come from two sides. From the program operator side, they actually feel that because and again, I'm conveying to you what they conveyed to me. So sorry, apologies, Move Mountain View, if I don't convey everything exactly accurately. But essentially, because Move Mountain View operates the congregation-based sites here, but they also operate RV lots both here and in Mountain View and other communities. And so in their experience, I think just the nature of the RVs, they're better suited for places where they don't have to move every day. And so I think participation in a congregation-based lot just tends not to be a very good fit for those households. And so they really try to put them into maybe a more suitable lot. Also, just due to the sizing of the RVs themselves, the way that they have to space the RVs to have distance between them, it can just create more challenges in the congregation lots when you're limited in the number of vehicles you can have to 4. And I think, so both from a household service perspective and from a dimensional perspective, it becomes harder to serve them in the RVs. I think from neighbors who, again, expressing concerns before the programs are operating and not necessarily after, I think there's a concern around maybe unsightliness of RVs or kind of, would there be more problems that could be associated with folks who are living in RVs and those who are living in vehicles. I think that's a little bit maybe just concern that may not have borne out. But I know, again, from the program operator's perspective, they prefer, and I would say if another operator came in and worked with the church and wanted to serve RVs, they would be allowed to under the ordinance, but the current operator just chooses not to, and that's totally fine. But it's not the ordinance preventing them from doing it.
Very good. Thank you. That segues into the next question I wanted to ask. You're probably going to get several questions about the number of spaces in each site. So one that I had was, is there a tendency for multiple households to shelter as a group? Because if that happens, then either the site might not be large enough, or given the low utilization numbers, it may be they're avoiding them because there's not enough space to handle everyone.
That's a good question. I hadn't asked that question specifically of the service providers, like if that's a common occurrence. So, but they didn't volunteer. It doesn't mean that it's not, but I just couldn't say definitively one way or another if that's a common occurrence in terms of households being in multiple vehicles, wanting to be together and not being able to find sufficient space.
Okay, I think that's it for me for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Chang?
Thank you. So I had a couple of data questions. So if you look at table 2 on packet page 12, does the positive placements column reflect households or individuals?
Sorry, you said table 2.
Yes, table 2, bottom of packet page 12.
Yes, I believe that represents the individuals.
Individuals. Okay, thank you. And then, do you happen to know how many churches there are in Palo Alto?
I do not know the answer to that question. Yeah, I don't know the answer. There are several dozen, I think, at least, but I'm not sure the exact number.
Okay. And then what's the capacity of the Gang Road location? The report says 12 RVs, but does it also have additional spaces for regular vehicles?
Well, it certainly wouldn't have, so I would say if, let's say they had, obviously an RV is bigger than a car. I don't know that they would like double up a space there and kind of have 2 cars parked in an RV space. And I think they do try to prioritize RVs there. So I would say 12 overall, but certainly if they reconfigured it, maybe for vehicles could be more.
Thank you. So sorry, I'm trying to read my list of questions here. Oh, following up on Commissioner Aiken's question about congregation sites not being ideal for serving RVs, is it also because of hookups that are needed, or is that an issue at all?
So the RVs, even at Gang Road, there's not like really sites for them to hook up. Like if they need to dump their waste, I believe they get vouchers to go to, I think there's a site in Redwood City where they're able to go and kind of dump waste and do things like that. I don't think that they have, I think they may have some electric hookups. I will say it's been a little while since I've been out to the site. But certainly if they were at a congregation, they would not have hookups, and like running generator wouldn't be allowed. So again, there's maybe some inconveniences to being at the congregation-based site for an RV.
Okay. And then quick question about on page 15, there was a comment from, I think, one of the applicants, like the congregation applicants, about changing the neighborhood notification process. Do you know what was driving that? Like, can you provide a little bit more color, given that the city does do that already?
I would say it's probably driven by either misunderstanding the process or kind of the sense that, I mean, I think we could all say, like, when's the best time to let someone know you're going to do something? Is it when you've decided is it when the church applies, or our point of notification is after that we've reviewed the application and decided we could approve it? So let's say someone submits an application, but we can't approve it. We wouldn't notify the neighborhood that we've received an application that, we can't approve. And so the time comes when we're going to approve it. What we did try to do to address this is allow that neighborhood meeting to happen. And then so we would notice that there's going to be a neighborhood meeting about this application that's going to be approved. And then after the meeting, then say, okay, this application is going to be approved and the appeal period now starts. Before, what we were doing is notifying folks that we have received an application, it's pending approval unless it's appealed. And then we essentially cram in a neighborhood meeting because people would want to have one. We delay the repeal process. And so it just kind of became a little clunky. And so instead of, why don't we just do the neighborhood meeting if we know we're going to have to do one, and then tell people that, so I would say we've tried to respond to that in some ways.
Okay. There was also mention of an appeal that was then withdrawn. Can you just provide a little bit more color as to what the supposed issue was that then became a non-issue?
Yes, that was with Stevenson House, which was next door to, I believe, the Unitarian Universalist Church.
Yeah.
And so their board was concerned, I think similar concerns to other neighbors in terms of safety, security, what's going to be happening? How do we know what's going to be happening at the site? Who's going to be there? How is it going to impact our residents? And really just overall, I think, trust building. I think the program provider, the city, were able to answer their questions and work together with the board of Stevenson House to get to a place where not only they felt secure, but there were some physical improvements that were made in terms of, I believe there was a gate and some other items that were just needed to get discussed and got hammered out, and to everyone's satisfaction. And so the appeal was withdrawn.
Okay. And then on packet page 16, the report states that Caltrans is proposing to reduce available street parking on El Camino. Are those reductions temporary or expected to be permanent?
I think as proposed, they are expected to be permanent. However, I think there's a good deal of space and time and other things to go before that actually happens.
Okay.
So not to say that it won't happen, but just to say there's a lot of politics that could happen between now and then. So.
Okay. And then my final question is around sort of how this whole process works. So if a household or an individual is assigned to a particular site, is there a time limitation to their assignment? Meaning, do they run out? Is there you can only stay here for 1 week or 3 months, or how does that work?
So they do have some requirements with the program in terms of meeting, I believe, monthly with their caseworker and essentially creating a housing plan and like a plan to stable housing. So I don't think that there's a specific time limit with Move Mountain View specifically where they can stay, but there is kind of routine check-ins. And again, the goal is to get folks into stable, housing. Sometimes that can take a little bit longer for folks than others, but that is always the goal. And I don't think it's kind of like a in perpetuity with no kind of checking in attached to that. And so trying to, keep people on a path towards stable housing in accordance with the plan that they create.
Okay, so we don't have, because I was looking at the data tables, and it looks like, I'm guessing that there's like contiguous stretches of time where a particular vehicle may have been utilizing one place, but I guess I can't tell.
Yeah,
So-
it is hard to tell. And part of the challenge with the data, and we may be able to get more over time. It's also one reason we are asking the program provider to aggregate the data so that we couldn't trace it back to any particular individual and say like, oh, it was that car that was there at this, particular church that I saw for X months. So it is a little challenging. I mean, on the positive side, we do hear anecdotally that some folks are there just for a few days. By the time they get in the program, they're able to get, resourced into housing. Sometimes it just depends. There are, for example, a lot of resources to get households with children into housing very quickly. And the county does a really good job of finding households with kids, places to stay that are permanent and kind of more stable.
So when you were talking to the administrator, did they ever cite any examples where people had to be turned away, where they'd reached capacity? Because overall, the program we have more room, right, than is being used. But I'm wondering, is there like a seasonality to it, or do they ever, because even with the RVs, where there's only 12 RV spaces, the vast majority of people who are being housed in vehicles are in RVs.
Yeah.
But even the Gang Road location is only at 64%.
Yeah. So some of it would be, I'd say they did not volunteer any challenges with capacity. I don't think that's an issue. I would think for RVs, it is. I would say part of the challenge with the RVs is that, like, for example, when they got the site started up, there may be days in there where technically the site was available, but really the program was still getting going. And so there's some time that's counted in there, as well as kind of the transition time of, let's say someone does leave the site in a positive placement, even though you may have someone on a wait list, these are very vulnerable households. So like getting in touch with that person, finding them, getting them to actually come to the site sometimes can take some outreach and just some time to work with those families to get them to the site. And so even though there may be gaps, even though there's maybe a wait list that's waiting to come in, it's not like they're right outside, just ready to drive in right away.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I would just like to state for the record that we have been joined by Chair Smith from the Human Relations Commission, and I have another light that is either Vice Chair Eberly or Commissioner Liu.
Thank you. It's me, Vice Chair Eberly. Sorry, I didn't know. We never use the lights, so I had no idea how to.
It worked out perfectly, so.
Sorry, and I don't want to interrupt Member Eberly, but I did want to say we do have Michael Love, who is with Move Mountain View, who's in the, what do you call it, the Zoom attendee list. So just to say that he's with the program. So if there are program-specific questions through the chair, if you wanted to direct them to him, maybe after public comment, we could hear from them, or he may make public comments related to the program.
Okay, thank you for letting me know that. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I have a few questions. First of all, did you get any feedback from the tenants?
We did not. We did not ask the tenants for feedback. So any of the feedback would come through the program operator. And I would say they're participants, just to be, you mean by the program participants, correct?
Yes. Yes, because I have heard some complaints, I think, about the inability of having children out playing around, having to be, not being able to have any property outside of the vehicle. And you haven't heard this feedback?
I have not. Again, we could maybe hear from Mr. Love later on. He might be able to address that concern.
Okay. The other question I have is, I noticed that seems to be, there's more positive placements from the church, from the congregation's spaces versus the public one. And why is that? Why do you think that is?
I would be hazarding a guess if I were to say why there's more. It could be a number of reasons. It could either be, the positive placements can be both up to what's available to provide to folks, as well as their willingness to accept it, or folks may choose to leave the program before they're able to get to a positive placement, either from a variety of personal needs or decisions. So I wouldn't be able to hazard a guess on why one is more than the other.
Do you think there's an advantage to having these smaller places? Where I don't know how Move Mountain View works, and maybe he can answer this question. But I'm just wondering if there's more contact with the tenants, if there's more help, more support. versus a large lot?
Yeah, I think we could, through the chair, if she would like to have Mr. Love answer the question, we could have them answer that on behalf of Mountain View.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. And I noticed that he's been moved up so he can participate, I believe.
Are you there, Michael?
Yes, hi, good evening, I am.
Sorry for speaking on behalf of you earlier. Hopefully I didn't speak,
That's
but he
quite all
confirmed
right.
the errors that I made.
None, yeah, none at all, no worries.
I think the question from Member Everly was around if there is any reasons that y'all see why there may be more placements that are positive from our congregation sites than from the Gang Road site.
I would have to review our data a little bit on that. I think that's a really good question. I have to admit, I haven't looked at it that way comparatively. But my hunch is that we get some younger folks that have taken to living in their car and some very old folks who've taken to living in their car, but the placement tends to be easier for a single person that can be kind of slotted into either some kind of permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing, or even find something that's affordable for them. They may have work, for example, that as a case, as compared to our RV families that may not be working, and there's some challenges there, and that I don't know. They're certainly as interested in getting out of their RVs, it appears, but I really have to check that and get back to you why that appears to be happening. I think there is value in having the smaller lots for the reason that, as has been pointed out, should the parking start to be harder to acquire on the street in the future, that may impact the cars as much as the RVs. And so having spots that are, even though there's some open, we are almost at, we're 47% tonight, I think, on the church lots I counted. But to have places available for people quickly has been helpful. We can often take the car dweller in the day that we get the application, interview them, and get them situated on a lot pretty quickly, which is helpful.
And there had been a question also from Member Everly around participants with children, wanting to be able to play on the site if there's been any challenges with the ordinance as drafted or the conditions of approval for being able to have toys maybe outside of the vehicle. Is that the question?
Yes.
Are you aware of anything like that?
That's a good question. It has to do with the clientele that we get on the different lots. We rarely have children on the congregational lots, very rarely. And so the RV lots is where we tend to see families with kids, and they're absolutely permitted to play outside on the lots and have their toys and things out. This is more the general upkeep of the lot for fire safety. And we would ask people to, if they're putting things out on the lot during the day, to put those things away and get them inside. It's the concern that we would be able to get emergency vehicles in there for their safety. But no, they're absolutely encouraged to play on the lot.
So just to clarify, so on the Gang Road site, you could have things outside,
Yes,
vehicle, RV.
yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And you rarely get children on the congregational lots, correct?
Very rarely. And actually, those sometimes, I mean, imagine more than one person living in a vehicle is hard. And as was brought up earlier, families, especially single parents with children, have a lot more avenues to services, and they tend to be there for a brief time. We want to get them off that situation and into some housing quickly, and the county is able to accommodate most of the time.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I have one other question. And you mentioned in the report that there's one congregation right now that's interested in applying for a permit correct? I thought I read that. That there's interest from one other congregation?
I don't think that
No?
is what, I don't think we have any current congregations that are waiting their permits right now.
That there's interest, I thought, just that there's interest, no?
I hope there is more interest from more congregations, but I can't tell you that I've been approached by any recently. I would have to say our staff person, Emily, is the planner who works on that. And at least it's a few months ago when we were working together, there wasn't anybody in her queue, but congregations will inquire, and then sometimes it'll be a few months before they then kind of take that next step.
Okay, so there's not a rush right now.
No.
Thank you. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I have more lights, but I want to make sure that we are sticking to clarifying questions and not the full discussion at this point, unless we have no speakers. I don't see any online. Do we have any in the room?
No, I have no requests for public comment.
Okay, so we'll just go ahead in the order. I believe Commissioner Causey.
Hi, thank you. As somebody who used to work with our faith-based organizations and also with community members who are very close to considering these programs, this is just really fantastic work to see. My first question is, I was wondering, how did they reach the number of maximum vehicles being 4?
It's a good question. When we created the program and the council asked us to look into it, we researched other neighboring programs in other cities that were similar, Mountain View being one of the closest and kind of having some of the more longstanding programs, and kind of mimic some of the numbers that other cities had for their projects. And so 4 was a number. I would have to say, I can't remember exactly all the cities, but 4 was a number, I believe, that in Mountain View. And I think they had at some point had allowed 8 vehicles, I want to say, but maybe it had adjusted to 4. And so that's kind of where the city settled.
Got it, got it. Are there any further, I was also looking at other cities' programs, are there any further regulations around thank you. Okay. Are there any further regulations around RV safety? I just know that in other cities, there's been concerns about them being very flammable.
Yes. So in regard to the RV lot, and I would say I'm not sure if this is in the ordinance for RVs or in the way that the lease has been written with Move Mountain View for the specific Gang Road site. And even for the congregation-based sites, part of what you have to have is a site plan that shows where the vehicles are going to be parked. In a congregation-based program, the parking lots are usually ample enough that there's plenty of room. It's not really a huge issue in terms of a fire safety. It's more about spacing between the vehicles to provide some privacy, as well as kind of trying to put them in the best situation for even privacy from residences or other nearby uses. At the Gang Road site, because the site is it's kind of a long rectangular site, which can be hard when you're maneuvering RVs in and out of. And so there was a lot of work done to really pace out and mark out where could those 12 vehicles be, and as well as having fire safety access. So that site plan had to be reviewed by the fire department, and then that's where there's kind of the 12 spaces for the vehicles.
Got it. And final question. We were talking about having the preferences in this policy for people with ties to Palo Alto, et cetera, and also that there are currently openings in the program, and walking that line of, the program manager saying that there is like already they try to match people with the best sites possible. Is there any concern that implementing these preferences could create like more vacancies
Well, I think that would be, so I think what we would not want to do, I think collectively, would be to do things that would prevent what he just described happening, where someone can walk in and say, hey, I'm ready to participate in the program. Mm-hmm. And that very moment they're getting placed, right? So that there's that immediate, we're able to serve you, not, come back later, right? Which is not what we want to tell somebody who's in a vulnerable situation. So I think the scenario where the preferences become either necessary or a challenge is when we start having scarcity of sites, when there's not enough available slots to easily put someone in a place. And so we might have to say, well, we can't place you in Palo Alto because X, Y, or Z. And so we'll have to wait until there's a spot available to you. I think certainly the preferences would not, I think, suggest that someone should be removed from a site who's already been placed, but more part of the screening of to place them in a Palo Alto site if there were a wait list that people with connections to Palo Alto might go up higher on that wait list for the Palo Alto sites. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think that that gives me a lot of really good information. And actually, my final question is just to clarify one more time, you said this earlier in your presentation. For the community meeting, what is it? You said it was at the director's discretion of when to have a community meeting. How is that feedback taken into account? Is it just this will still be happening, but we want to take the temperature of the neighborhood?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what we have been doing, and then how what's proposed differs slightly, I would say. So what we have been doing, and the current ordinance that's on the books right now, essentially is that we receive an application, we review the application. Once the department, in this case, it's the authority of the director, says, yes, this application meets all the criteria, we are going to issue a permit for them to operate a safe parking program. That is when we send a mailed notice within 600 feet of the site and saying, there is a pending application that is going to be approved in 14 days. Unless you appeal it, then it will happen. So that kind of creates an environment where if a neighbor is just not sure and doesn't know what it is and is concerned, then it feels like their only avenue is to appeal it. Right. And to say, I've got to just appeal the whole thing because that's the only thing I can do. And so what happened in practice is we would essentially say, okay, we're extending the appeal deadline in order to hold the meeting, talk to folks, have dialogue, get to a point usually where the congregation and the neighbors reach some type of either agreement or understanding or trust, because the congregations want to have good relationships with their neighbors. And then we pick up and we say, okay, now the appeal deadline's there. No one appeals it because we've gotten to a good place and the permit's issued. So what differs now is that the director can say, we're going to hold a community meeting, which I would imagine in most cases, unless there's a congregation that has no neighbors, we would hold the community meeting. And then after that, issue the notice. So the first notice would say, you're invited to a community meeting. It's on XYZ day at a time to talk about this, upcoming permit. And then the second notice would say, the meeting happened based on the input. Director is going to issue the permit. You have 14 days to appeal. So there still is an appeal process if someone is not satisfied or concerned, but it happens in a more hopefully collaborative environment versus kind of the only thing you can do is appeal or feel like the only thing you can do is appeal the permit itself.
Got it. Thank you so much for clarifying all that.
You're welcome.
Chair Smith?
Rachel, good to
Hi,
see
good
you
to
again.
see you. Yes.
How many churches applied?
So far, the 4 that have received permits are the 4 that have applied. We have had in the past, like the very first year, a couple of churches that were interested, but that didn't end up submitting applications.
Do you know what was the resistance? Was it internal to the church or external from the community?
The one congregation that I can think of, I think one, the pandemic, let's say that happened after this ordinance was adopted.
Okay.
So they ended up, I think, using a lot of their rear yard space for meeting space, which would rear yard, their parking lot for outdoor meetings and for holding their church services, and then some other facility enhancements. And since then, I just don't know if what's happened internally to the church, but they haven't approached us yet. So that's the one example I can state. So I would say, I guess, internal to the congregation would be my answer.
Because I noticed on page 15 of the packet, 2 of the points was opposition from neighbors and changing the neighborhood notification process. From what I've heard from some churches, it's become very daunting for the neighborhood process because you will have 1 or 2 voices that can coalesce against them. How do we balance the church trying to do good for 4 of our people in our community versus one really loud person in the appeals process trying to push their issue?
Yeah, that is like a question of democracy, I think. How do we weigh the needs of the few and those of the many, and where do things fall? I will say this proposed ordinance continues the ability for a neighbor or I should say a resident or property owner within 600 feet. So it isn't anywhere. It's within that 600-foot radius to file an appeal. So I think that was one attempt to try to say that a person filing appeal, even if it's just one person, has a close-in stake to what's happening, right? They're proximate to the issue. And I would say to your earlier point around just kind of the dauntingness, particularly the first congregation that went through it, it was probably not very pleasant. It was a lot of work and it was a lot of conversations that they may not have anticipated and a lot of bridge building and smoothing with their neighbors. And so I don't want to say it's not a challenge. I'm not sure. We could change the appeal process. The PTC could opine on a different process. However, I'm not sure what we can do. I think our attempt to kind of institute the neighborhood meeting more regularly as like, we're going to just come to you and tell you what's happening and share with you is one. I think less effective and somewhat hard to administer could be requiring the church to hold its own meeting. But I think often until the city sends the official notice, sometimes folks aren't really listening. And then when that happens, it's like, oh, this is really happening. Now I would like to get more involved.
Also, the appeal is not free, right? It's a regular appeal process, so there is a cost associated.
What's the cost?
I don't know the exact cost, I
Is it-
forget, but
Veronica, do you know how much an appeal costs to be filed?
Commissioner Kraus?
Just Rachel, nice to see you.
Nice to see you as
Thank
well.
you for all the work you've done. Let's get this close to me. There we go. I just had some questions on the most recent lot that's become available that only has 23 numbers for the last 6 months. Do you have a sense of what that looks like?
I'm going to call on Michael Love on the line to see for Congregation Etz Chaim if there's been placements there or any kind of update on how that site's been in operation. I think they got their permit in June of this year, so just a few months.
Yes, hi. I had that right in front of me because I thought that would come up. Who's on each lot and how many? Hang on a second. The short answer is that Etz Chaim has had clients on the lot, and to the eye of the beholder, they tend to be invisible because they don't necessarily show up. They never seem to show up exactly at 7 or whenever that particular congregation's lot is open. And they tend to leave as soon as they get up to go off and do their business. So we've always experienced that there's not very much interchange between the car vehicle dwellers and the host congregations. That's not unusual. It has been a slower start for sure in Palo Alto to begin to fill the lots, but we have folks on every lot tonight on the congregational lots. We have 7 across the system. So there's 3 with 2 clients and 1 with 1 client. But they are generally elusive. It's a work for us to make the connection with them, which usually happens during the daytime by phone and text, just to schedule their visits with their caseworkers. Because they're just, by definition, using that property a lot less than our RV dwellers. So it's sort of the opportunity to run into each other is less.
And that's regarding the most recent lot that got added. I see. I know there are 3 synagogues in Palo Alto. I don't know how many churches there are or mosques. That might be some really useful data long-term.
Certainly jotting that down is something we could look into.
Commissioner Liu?
Thank you. I have a few questions likely for Mr. Love on the operator side. I want to elaborate a little bit on Vice Chair Chang's question and redirect it to Mr. Love. So how is the 4-vehicle limit actually enforced, and how often do we actually hit the 4-vehicle capacity on any given site? Like how many nights per year?
It's a really good question. The way that we regulate the number of vehicles to 4 is that we do not place more than 4. So there's no scenario in which a client just can drive in. They're absolutely required to file an application with us and go through an interview and screening process. So it's not well, somebody told me it's not like you're pulling into a campsite at Yosemite and telling the ranger in the morning. They have to be pre-registered. And so since the custom and the rule is 4, we simply don't enroll more than 4. We have been full only very occasionally at the congregational lots. But it's easy to regulate it. I think it is a question of having too many vehicles. If more than 4 strikes me as being tricky, because it can start to take on be a bigger task for the congregation to host more vehicles. I know it's tempting because they're smaller units and there's often a lot of parking spaces that aren't being used, but 4 seemed like a good way, and maybe in a year or so, we know how to do this well enough that congregations and the communities, the municipalities might make a change in that. But 4 seems like a comfortable number. It allows the community, the congregations to participate and help, and it also encourages, I think, their neighborhoods that, hey, we can do this, and it's not, destroying our neighborhood. We're actually feeling good about helping people. So maybe it's good to start small, and we'll see, how we live with that. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah.
I would add, Member Lou, that in addition, the program operator does do site visits each night and morning. And so that's also part of the making sure that, how does somebody just not decide, oh, hey, I can just go park there. So there's that kind of on the enforcement side as well.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Just to drill down a little more. So there have been a few nights where we have been at capacity across the system at the congregations, it sounded like. So in those cases, have we actually needed to turn people away? Or just in general, have we ever needed to turn people away from the congregation sites?
In Palo Alto, no. There's always been a spot for them.
Thank you. A couple more questions. Have we spoken with the folks who don't participate in the safe parking programs? I understand we want to do more outreach, but is there a sense that there are inherent limitations to the current program or improvements that we'd have to make?
Well, I can offer some, and then would ask Mr. Love to offer any additional comments. I think certainly there is a requirement to leave in the morning and then return at night. So if someone doesn't prefer to have to move that frequently, that would probably be just a very practical barrier for someone to say, well, I can do the same thing without, the benefits that you're offering, which would namely be a safe and secure and relatively clean restroom, and, the monitoring and the connection to services. So if someone didn't feel that those were benefits, kind of in the trade-off of needing to move routinely, which they still would need to do in their vehicle, but maybe not as frequently.
Yep.
Maybe not at those specific times. That could be one programmatic limitation. Certainly, we know that the congregation lots have vehicle type limitations in accordance with the program operator's kind of preferences. But I don't know, Mr. Love, if there's any additional barriers that kind of prevent folks from wanting to just even connect to a service at all, whether it's 24 hours or overnight, that they rather just kind of be on their own versus working with you all.
I would say that's true. There is vehicle dwellers are as unique as you and I are in our neighborhoods, all the rest of our neighbors. And there is a slice of that community It's not a great big slice, but there's a slice of that community, a segment of that community that really doesn't, is sort of out there to be as independent as they can be. And they really don't want to be under the care of a program that requires them to meet with a caseworker, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not as attractive for somebody who's gotten used to being utterly independent and alone, which is kind of a shame because often those folks suffer the most in terms of, state of mind from being isolated. But we've tried to think and haven't come up with anything, I'll admit, ways to make it so that there's more value to somebody to be in the program other than just getting a safe place to park, because basically I can find that behind Safeway. And if I don't want to work with a caseworker, that kind of seals the deal. I wouldn't want to be in the program. I know Palo Alto is beginning a really good outreach program with the hiring of some community outreach workers. We hope that just as we get the word around, we'll start to see more people that check us out. But as what's keeping them away seems to be primarily in the congregational lots, particularly. They just are not that eager to go in the direction of housing. That's rarer in the RVs.
Got it. So the main limitation of the program is almost that it is a program at all. One last question. On the operator side, are we concerned about any of the operational challenges that we're proposing to encode here?
I think Mr. Love can speak to that. I noted certainly that the preference program was not well supported by the Move Mountain View. I don't believe any of the minor operational changes had any challenges. Those are on slide 10, if you all have the slides. But certainly, Michael, you can speak to any of the challenges you may have noted.
The preferences, I don't want it to appear that we're not, supportive of that. We're absolutely can support that. We explored that as whether that would be, good or bad for the way Palo Alto wanted that the program to unfold in Palo Alto, because we had noticed some limitations that placed on the Mountain View program. And we kind of explored that together. But at this time, the way that those are painted in the proposed regulation, I don't see that as being a constraint for us. Statistically, even when we're early on in our work, we just taking people in and talking with them and learning about them, we found that we were talking to local people 80% of the time. So, as I think you brought up earlier, somebody who has work and a doctor in a neighborhood in Gilroy is not very interested in commuting from Palo Alto down to Gilroy just for a place to park. So that the preferences are one thing that I would want to encourage us that's workable. It's not going to be a disincentive for us.
Got it. Just want to confirm that there were no objections to any of the operational changes. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Love. Commissioner Templeton?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm gonna start with saying how appreciative I am that we piloted this program and the results look really positive. And I think you've highlighted that, so I don't need to go into more detail. I do want to ask some tough questions here tonight. We do have a difficult political environment that we're also navigating. And so I want to just talk about, we have a section in here about vetting the client, the application, how background checks are dealt with. And the question that comes to mind is it possible, or how does it work if somebody is, let's call it poorly behaved on one site? Can they move then to another site, or do they get some kind of red flag on their account. And can you speak to that, Ms. Tanner, start with you and then Mr.
Yeah.
Love if needed.
So I'll say maybe just to start overall that there are, just maybe set the landscape a little bit, because I think yours kind of goes beyond just like Palo Alto, but really to the region, right? And so there is a lot of coordination at the county level, that the county is kind of the center, and there is a unified system that all the providers, whether they're doing safe parking or another type of shelter program, participate in. So ideally for both the participants and all the program providers, there's like one John Smith in there, and if they go to this place for that or here for this, everyone knows it's the same person receiving different services. So there's a high level coordination, at least kind of from that level. What I would ask Mr. Love, and I know he's spoken to this several times in community meetings around their no tolerance in Move Mountain View for certain behaviors, and so people would be asked to leave the site. Maybe you can speak more directly, Michael, if someone engages in some behavior that's not great at your site, would they be able to go to, another program operator who would be maybe not aware, or if you're able to flag that in the coordinated system that this person may need a different type of place to have a program that maybe gives more guidance or boundaries that help them to still get housing, but maybe not in a parking lot site. Mr. Love, could you speak to that if you have any of those occurrences?
Sure. Yes, if we have someone who's egregious in their violations, we can put a note on the system, a system-wide note that says this is why this person is no longer going to be served by Move Mountain View. Either there was whatever the incident is. And so that everyone's advised that at the very least, they want to have an extra deep and long conversation with this client if they show up for services. Internally, we don't move someone, disqualify someone from one lot and then put them on another lot. If they're disqualified from the program, that's system-wide for us. They can't go to another lot, say from a Palo Alto lot, and come over to a Mountain View lot. Now, if it's a subtler kind of a situation where it's not a high-level egregious violation, it may be just a matter of community chemistry. We might move somebody around before it comes to that when we see that there's some bad chemistry. We try to not street people. We want to keep them if we can, but there are absolutely things that they can do on our lots that they'll be told to leave immediately. There's other things that are less volatile, where we may give them 3 warnings and then say, you're not able to come into terms with this for following the rules. But the fact is that most people that are discharged are people who are very nice people, haven't been rowdy or anything, but they really made it clear that they just don't want housing and they'd really like to park in our lot forever. And the county simply won't allow us to do that. So most of the discharges I do are because people don't want to engage the program.
Thank you both. Yeah, I'm thinking of a pretty dangerous edge case right now, and I recognize that's not something you've normally encountered, and hopefully we don't encounter that. But I do want to make sure that we, as a body of the city, are thinking about that and working with our partners on it. Specifically, we are encouraging our faith institutions to participate, but we're having hate crimes against our certain faith communities, right? And also, we have identity, right? We want people to be safe in our programs, and I'm not sure, a 3 strikes for hate violations would be acceptable. I want to make sure that we can say that we don't pass somebody from one synagogue to another synagogue if they are hateful, right? Like I want to think about that and make sure that our partners are thinking about that. So I appreciate your explanation, and I would love to see us add a little bit more safety in that area. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Chair Smith and then Commissioner Hackman.
My question is, how many total parking spots do you think we need if we could approve whoever asks, I noticed the point in time count has gone down, but I'm suspecting it will go back up this year, given that some of the COVID rental protections have gone down. So the homeless population is spiking. It has gone up dramatically in shelters in the first 6 months of 2023. What is the maximum number of places do you think that the city A needs or B can handle?
Yeah, so I just was doing the math. So, if we're doing point in time count math, there are, if 181 folks are sleeping in vehicles and 68% in RVs, then that means 58 people are sleeping in cars or non-RV vehicles. So that would be, assuming that they're each in their own vehicle, that'd be 58 parking spots, which we're at 16 right now. Now, granted, each of those folks is probably not an individual. There are some, individuals that are in combined households, but we would need a significant number more parking spots than we are if every person living in a vehicle said, yes, I would like to participate, in this program.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Heckman?
Thank you. Chair, are we still just asking questions or also making comments?
We free to do anything.
Good. All right. All right. All right. So let me start with a couple of questions, and this one actually ties to the last question. So packet page 12, the second paragraph says of the 206 people in this year's Palo Alto count, 181 were sleeping in vehicles, which is nearly 90%. But if you go to the next paragraph, it describes 2022 with of the 276 unhoused Palo Alto households, 29% identified their vehicles as the most frequent place they slept. So that's a big delta. And I was wondering if perhaps the 181 I wanted to find out if that's a correct number, or maybe it should have been 81, because that's roughly a third, closer to a third of the 206.
Yeah, so part of it is using two different data sources. So one is the point in time count, and the other is numbers reported through the county's VDAT system, I believe. I'm not sure if that's how they pronounce it. What did you say?
The VI SPDAT assessment.
Of course.
Great, much better than my pronunciation of it. The VI SPDAT system, which just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? So those are two different measures of counting. The point in time count is literally going around and surveying individuals in real time as they are waking or sleeping, whereas the VI SPDAT is going to be, I would imagine, more people who are interacting with the county. And so it's a different maybe measure of the data and way that it's taken in. So we provided both. Their numbers are different, but to try to give a sense of the magnitude of the challenge.
Okay. And I do think that's important to tie into the last question, because if it's 29% are regularly sleeping, then that reduces the demand from 58 to some smaller number. Okay, next question. Let's see, this is actually in the ordinance. One of the new suggested additions to our ordinance as it becomes permanent is on packet page 27, no temporary structures. No temporary structures or amenities such as clotheslines shall be allowed to be erected in relation to the safe parking program. So my question is a folding chair or a playpen, are those amenities? Are we, because if they're not intended to be, I think we need to clarify that language. I understand at Gang, the children are encouraged to play, and I would think that, there might be a playpen or something that you would call an amenity. So is it the intention that you can't have things like folding chairs?
I would say it is not the intention to not have, chairs or other, I think going in concert with the next one, personal property, not that it shall never be outside of the vehicle, but that it wouldn't just kind of be there in perpetuity until the person leaves the program, but they'd bring it in and out kind of on a daily basis.
Okay, that's helpful. So I would encourage a little bit of looking at that word amenities, just so, again, because, part of the issue we will have long-term is not only, churches looking at this language, but also neighbors. And I don't want to fight in the future where in a in a congregational parking lot, somebody has put their chairs out and neighbors say, hey, that's an amenity. Right. So I think we should clarify that. All right. A couple of comments. First of all, I am a member of Congregation Etz Chaim, as is Commissioner Reckdahl, who's not here tonight. And earlier this week, I did talk to our executive director to get feedback on the program since the permit was received in June. The program has operated very well. There have been 0 incidents, problems of any sort. It is undersubscribed. Typically, there is a single car that will use it on a given night, and the most there has ever been is 2. I did also confirm that the restrooms are at least 25 feet from the street frontage, because that location, along Alma, it's closer to the street. Some of these, I understand, some of the congregations have them maybe tucked back. But I do think that we need to think about that 25 feet. While generally it makes sense, we could have a situation where that would be a bar to some congregation that wants to institute the program. And so I think the director should have some flexibility. On the preference list, my thought is that we should not include it, at least until we become oversubscribed, and then only as to the city lot. And it doesn't need to be in the ordinance for the city to do that. I do think it's important for these congregations that they be able to pursue their mission as they see fit. And I don't want that kind of requirement to be a bar to some congregation that might otherwise be willing to start this program. I want them to have that flexibility. And honestly, I mean, we all, I think, know that this is not a Palo Alto problem. This is a national problem with regional impacts. Where our city limits end at the next city's beginning, I think that it's important to place as many of these unhoused people in a safe environment every night as we can in every city. So I'd not be supportive of that. One item, the last item I'll bring up, and nobody's mentioned it so far, but it's in the staff report, this concept of density of permits. And that is, just the notion of how close to each other can congregations who have this service be. I think this is an opportunity where we can be sensitive to neighborhood concerns. And I think that someone who is within 600 feet of one of these sites can express their concern. I think it may be too much to have that same person within 600 feet of 2 sites. That might feel like an overconcentration to them, and I think that would be a reasonable way to feel. So I would think that we might want to separate them by 1,200 feet, so that no resident was ever in that situation where they felt concerns coming from 2 directions within 600 feet. Those are my questions and comments. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any lights, so I will make a few comments. Lots of really great questions asked, so I don't have a lot of questions left. I will agree with Commissioner Hegman that I don't think the preferences are necessary at this time. And I would like to give as much leeway to faith institutions that would like to be a part of this program, to craft a program for that works for their mission. And I also think that some faith institutions might feel they could handle more than 4 vehicles. And some faith institutions have very small lots, and some have very big lots. So I think there might be a better way. There might be a way to include that notion into the ordinance.
For amount of parking spaces.
Yeah, to allow more than 4 vehicles. So I would like to see that. And I appreciate that Mr. Love mentioned that it might become overwhelming for an institution to have more than 4, but if they felt like they could support more than 4, and maybe there's a way to do it with I mean, I think there's a lot of discretionary power that we have to where we put this cars. So I don't think it should become a problem. And who knows? I'm not quite sure how I feel about the density. I don't think it should be a really big problem because we're so carefully citing these on each parking lot situation that I don't see how anyone would feel overwhelmed. And it always occurred to me, this whole thing, I'm glad that we're doing it this way within a permitting process, but I was always surprised that a church said, we can let somebody use our parking lot at night if we want to. So I really appreciate that we have a more, a regular permitted process to go through. I think about the appeal process, I wanted to clarify, it was just our normal standard appeal process as written in the code. Okay.
Oh, so it does get appealed to the city council, that directly to the city council for decision. So I don't
Okay.
think that's for all permits, but there are some permits where the appeal is directly from the neighbor to the council.
Okay, so this one goes directly to the council. Okay, all right, thank you for clarifying that. So I think this is a great improvement to offer this citywide. So I just wanted to thank you for doing that. I don't see any lights. Do I have any other comments from my colleagues or my new colleagues?
Just one comment on density. I know the place that density will be a challenge is Middlefield. Because I know there was one church that was offering it within 600 feet of us, and then people were like, are you going to offer it? Because we're in 600 feet of probably 4 churches. So I think even if there was a carve out for Middlefield and saying that along that church road corridor, not having like things contiguous within 1200, I think that area specifically we'd have to address, but I don't think it's anywhere else in Palo Alto if I can't remember.
I do have a few answers to some questions that came up during the discussion. Just for clarification, the appeal fee is $700, not $600. So it's gone up since that was last year. And the VI SPDAT system is one that's indicating folks who have wanted to engage and are looking for or seeking or participating in services. And so that's probably around like 29-ish people or 30 folks. So if we think about, 58 is the total number who are sleeping in vehicles, and of those maybe 30 or so who are like, I would like to not be doing this and work with the county or work with others to get out of that situation. So we're about halfway there if we think about it being roughly 30 in terms of the number of parking spots we have available.
Other comments?
Can I add something, Chair Suma?
Go ahead, Vice Chair, and then Commissioner Causey.
Thank you. Just on the density piece, again, I did think about that as I was looking at the map, as most of the churches are in South Palo Alto. And if you think about Middlefield, all those churches are again in South Palo Alto, where, they've been hurting with the fire and Mike's Diner almost closing and trying to revitalize the businesses there and maybe revitalize the whole corridor. So I do think about equity between North Palo Alto and South Palo Alto. And there's, I guess, First Congo is North Palo Alto. And it's the only one that is part of the program. But at the same time, I was thinking, I don't know how much parking the other churches have. And I don't know how many churches there are on that side. And I know the ones in downtown don't really have a lot of parking. So is that just the way it is, basically?
I think you make some good points just in terms of where churches are located is not evenly distributed. And then even to your point, the kind of the age in which the church was constructed and the kind of parking associated, or even just kind of the spaciousness, is not evenly distributed either. So that could lead to saying, yeah, we do want to have some type of density limit just to make sure that, because South Palo Alto happens to be where most of the churches with larger parking lots is, does that mean that's where all of the safe parking lots need to be? And so if we're kind of saying, happy medium. Maybe it is, 1,200 or 600 feet to just give some breathing room and not make that part of town feel like that they have to have all of the safe parking there, even though that's where most of the churches, many churches are. So
Just one thing, I do want to just make this one comment that I remember when this program first came out and there was outcry. I remember getting calls from some of my kids' classmates' parents to try to organize to fight the program. And I am so happy to hear that there's been no problems and you don't really hear about it anymore. So it exists. It seems to be, working well with those communities. So it's really nice to hear that it's been successful.
Commissioner Causey, did you?
I didn't have my light on.
Okay.
It was me.
Oh,
So
Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to get some information about what Mr. Love referred to, and it's referred to a couple times in the report. So the city has started a contract with Life Moves for the services of 2 full-time outreach workers. So they are just being onboarded now. One of them is on the streets, and I will be meeting with them tomorrow, but those outreach workers will be having a route or, in different places in the community, but they will also be making contact with vehicle dwellers and RV dwellers as well. And we'll be partnering with agencies that we already have that have ties with the RV community. So I wanted to let you know that.
Thank you for that. May I ask you a question? Anecdotally, I notice a huge diminishment of the RVs parked on El Camino in front of Stanford. Do we have any idea why? Did people just leave during COVID? I mean, it's maybe some of it, or?
I don't know. I don't have a specific answer to that. I know that one of my colleagues is, maybe Melissa.
she's on the line, I think.
Yeah, so one of my colleagues is also on the line that may be able to answer that specifically as well.
Ms. McDonough, I don't know if you want to address that. I think you just got promoted. And I know we also have Megan Fogarty from Stanford, but I'm not sure if she knows the information regarding what happened to the RVs. Melissa?
So you're asking about El Camino Real specifically? This is Melissa McDonough, assistant to the city manager.
Hi, yes. Thank
Hi.
you for joining us. Yeah, I was just curious anecdotally because I count them as a habit when I drive by, and there were 13 today. And at one point there were over 40. So I'm just wondering if anybody knows if they found a better place or if they've moved out. I don't know.
So I can only give you an anecdotal answer in return to your anecdotal question. During my conversations with our police officers and some of our service providers, recently there's been a lot more movement of RVs off of El Camino because of Stanford football games. So you may just be encountering the displacement of those vehicles, is what I would expect.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm well aware of them having to move on football days, but this is just so many fewer than there used to be. But thank you for that information. Do I have any other comment? Oh, Commissioner Chang?
I did have a question. So it looks like, there's maybe total of less than 60 right now, assuming that the numbers don't change. As Chair Smith had mentioned that they are already changing. But maybe 60 cars or non-RVs, and then about 120-ish RVs. And so it actually seems like it would be the RV parking that would be a real challenge. Do we know where they are going right now? This is kind of a piggyback on Chair Suma's question, as well as given that we only have 12 spaces that are suitable for RVs, what's the solution there? And it also sounds like the housing the folks in RVs is a stickier problem because they might need a larger space because there's more people in the household.
Yeah, certainly. I think would refer to Ms. McDonough around where folks are going, or Mr. Love, in terms of, where do folks go when they're not parked where they may have been parked. I'm sure there's a number of places. I think certainly the numbers would suggest that if we had more capacity for more RVs to be parked, there could be more participation by those who are living in RVs in the program. Certainly we have a the amount of space we have relative to the number of vehicles is pretty lopsided, right? 12 spaces and 181 people, or 68% of that living in RVs. So I think it was like 123 if we use the point in time number. So, not really a one-to-one space. The options would be to try to expand the public program, which would be, the city identifying more of its resources available for RVs. That could be one option. Another option, which could be considered, is to allow other types of lots that are not congregations to also host safe parking programs. And so that might be a shopping center. It could be some part of the research park or Stanford or other types of institutions that may, for a variety of reasons, want to do something like that. I believe this is, I believe like at LA, for example, I think one of the VAs there hosts like a safe parking in their parking lot, in part to serve the veterans that are often their patients. And so we could think of other institutions that could be hosts to these types of programs besides congregations, and perhaps could have larger capacity for RVs. So it'd be both allowing other types of parking lots to host safe parking and including RVs and who they could serve. But then the other challenge would be, or thing to do, would be to find the service provider to match with those lots to then service the RV community. And again, whether or not those are 24-hour lots where they can stay kind of, and not have to move frequently, or if it's a kind of similar to the congregation program. So not an unsolvable problem, but certainly would take some different dimensions possibly than the program that we're considering today.
I see that Ms. McDonough has a hand up. I don't know if that's from before. Okay, it's down.
It was up to more fully answer your question. I'm sorry it didn't occur to me right when I spoke previously. But the other thing that's going on in El Camino right now is our sanitary sewer replacement project. And as part of that project, we're going segment by segment. There's both daytime and nighttime work. And our workers have sort of noticed all of the vehicles on the road, letting them know that this work is going to be happening, when it's going to be happening on different segments, and have also been in communication with Move Mountain View and some other stakeholders that have connections with the vehicle dwellers in Palo Alto.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Liu, is your light on? No. Vice Chair Eberly? No.
No.
Okay, thanks. I am not seeing any more lights than if no one else has anything to add, I would just like to make sure with Ms. Tanner that you got all the information that you think you need, that you got questions answered.
I would only say, well, one is just a correction to my previous number. In the SVDAT system, there are 79 individuals, which is 29%. So I think I said 30, which is 30% of folks living in their vehicles or who are unhoused are living in their cars. And that's number is 79 individuals. Although I will say, I don't know, Melissa, if you know this chart that we're looking at, it doesn't differentiate cars from RVs. So I'm not sure if that number includes RVs or not. But the point is we have more people who are living in their vehicles than we have safe parking spots, I think still stands. Just how far from that number, it kind of depends on what we're counting. The only thing I would say, not to prolong this joint hearing, but certainly if there are any commissioners from the HRC who had any thoughts regarding preferences, density, other things that the PTC will be voting on, I think they would appreciate to hear that now, as opposed to after they voted. And then if not, then the PTC would adjourn, or under the chair, I'm satisfied as staff person with the hearing.
Okay. Human Relations Commissioners, would you like to weigh in on some of the questions, preferences, and density? I think we've already heard some. Go ahead.
And I think, first of all, thank the Planning Commission for having us. You didn't have to, so we're grateful for including us in this process. The gentleman that goes to Etaim, I think he brought up several clear things. I think when you're dealing with faith institutions, allowing them to structure around what they do. I know, for example, in Mountain View, there are some of the faith institutions, particularly the Catholic Church, that they only wanted to do females as the individuals. They wanted to provide a safe haven for females in cars. So I think giving some freedom to match mission with program, I think is critical. The other thing that I've heard from several faith leaders is the Palo Alto process has been applied to this. And as a faith leader, you want to do good, but you also don't want to be stretched out. So as we consider the appeal process, understanding that churches, faith institutions don't want negative press, don't want to be dragged. There was at the initial time of the program, there was fear mongering. Like, are we getting drug addicts? Are we getting people that are criminals? Are we getting this? And so we will need the spaces, but how we do the appeals process, I think, needs to be adjusted, understanding some of the sensitivities in the institutions. And finally, I think we should look beyond faith institutions to expand, because we are going to tap out in capacity, particularly if I agree with the 1,200 feet on Middlefield or in Church Corridor. So when you start doing that, you take out the churches on Middlefield, but you also take out the churches behind them, like the Church of Christian Scientists and part of the Catholic Church property, and a lot of those other properties that are on Cowper and some other streets. So we should look at incorporating other community partners in this process, because I think there will be a need, and I think it is a good thing. And a final thing, the chair, she made an I think an astute observation that maybe we should look at scaling the amount of people or cars we can have on property based on some quotient for, and I'm just random, like a random number, for every 25 spaces or every 20 spaces, you could get one extra car or some number like that. And I don't know the math. Don't quote me on 20, because I don't know church parking lots. I know where the church parking lot is. I don't know what it is, but I think it would be good for churches that have 100 or 130 parking spaces that are off the street to be able to say, okay, we want to do 6 cars, not 4 cars.
Anyone else? We have a request from Commissioner Templeton to put the slide up that shows what you need direction on for this.
So is slide 9, Veronica, and 10? Which just shows these are the proposed changes. So this one includes the duration, community meeting preferences, and then the next slide shows the appeal distance, no permit fee, and then the other operational changes. I would say the one thing that's not here is the question of the density of permits, whether or not that was something that it's not currently addressed in the ordinance. So we could add something if there was a desire to add something.
Thank you for that. If we are done with this part of the process, the study session, I would say we should take.
I was just going to make a comment of completely agreeing with Commissioner Heckman and Chair Suma and Chair Smith on the regarding preferences. I used to work for one of our faith-based institutions, and like many of our faith-based institutions, they provide temporary shelter for a good portion of the year. And I always ask them, I was like, don't you want to do more of this? And they were like, we absolutely do. But it is that worry about neighborhood concerns and the fear mongering we've seen in the past. And I just firmly believe in giving faith-based institutions as much flexibility as possible to serve their mission, raising maximums if possible. I know that in San Jose, the way that they do their policy around this is that at maximum 49% of the lot can be used for safe parking. And I'm not sure if that would be a good fit for us, but like Chair Smith said, maybe something like potential changes to raise the maximum.
Thank you for that. So I'm not seeing any other lights or hand signals. So we'll take a small recess and allow ourselves to reassemble, 8 minutes or something like that. Thank you very much to the Human Relations Commission, Chair and Vice Chair. You may stay and watch our deliberation if you don't want to go home, but you may also go home.
Thank you for having us. So you just press it once and then the light goes on?
Yeah, but I forget whether you press it up or down, so I always press it both ways.
Okay. Yes. Okay, we are back and we are now on our next item, which is an action item on the exact same issue. And that is regarding changes to our now temporary, to make our parking program, safe parking program permanent. Okay, so I don't think we need the same staff report again. So I'm just gonna, if there are questions, observations, motions, and I don't think I should check, but I don't know that there's anybody, Ms. Dow, who wants to speak at this time.
I have no request to speak.
Okay. I don't see anybody on Zoom either, so we'll just go straight into it. So I see a light. Commissioner Aiken.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about the preference list, and I think the consensus is developing that it's not necessary. I'd like to support that position at least. I'm waffling on the density question. I appreciate the potential political advantages of having the density limit, but I worry about imposing the restriction, particularly in cases where there might be an advantage to be gained from particularly the operator's point of view in having more closely spaced sites. So I'm still struggling with that. If we can, in our discussion, think about that a little bit more, might come to clarity on it for me. And the last observation is, I suspect we should recommend that there is some path to having more spaces per site. I don't know exactly what that path should be, but as the outreach process really takes off, then perhaps we'll get a little more contention for these spaces. I'm a little uncertain about that because we don't seem to be getting families in the congregation spaces, and that perhaps is directly related to the lack of RV support in those spaces. So it gets complicated quickly, but I think I would feel more comfortable if there were a path for congregations to offer more. That's everything that's on my list. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Chang.
I think Commissioner Aiken highlighted the three kind of decision points for me to everything else that's in the ordinance I support. So regarding the density, I think how I feel about the density can be traded off with the question about finding a way for congregations to host more than 4 participant vehicles. And the reason I say that is because on the one hand, initially I was thinking that density kind of wasn't an issue because if we think about all the churches on Middlefield, which is probably where it's mostly going to be impacted, as well as sort of the blocks parallel to Middlefield, the institutions on Middlefield are quite large for the most part, with very large parking lots. And so they're spaced very far apart as it is. And so I just don't, it doesn't seem like there'd be a huge impact there. It would be a different situation if there was a church corridor in downtown Palo Alto. But if we were then to say, have some sort of ratio, either square feet of parking lot space or number of parking spaces, and then allow many institutions on Middlefield to host many more than 4 vehicles, then I think there could start to be some pushback from the community. So where I stand on this I think that would need to be studied a little bit more because I'm not sure that we know what the right number would be unless it's a very small tweak, like an additional 2 vehicles or something like that. But if it were a blanket kind of per parking spot or per square footage rule, I don't know what the implications of that would be, and that would make me feel a little bit more nervous, and I wouldn't want to touch that unless we also put a density, something like 1,200 feet requirement. And then I concur. I don't think that the preferences are necessary at this point in time. Thank you.
Commissioner Heckman?
Thank you. Let me start with a question. Is the gang site subject to the ordinance?
The gang road site is not subject to this ordinance.
Okay. All right. So I used to represent what are called small scale group recovery homes. And these are facilities for 6 or fewer people in recovery, drug or alcohol addiction typically. And once upon a time, you had to get a local permit to occupy a house for that purpose in a residential neighborhood. And there was a tremendous amount of fear expressed by the neighbors. Ultimately, the federal government came in and said 6 or fewer, it's federal rules, no local permit. But what happened over time was largely those facilities moved in and did not cause a problem in the neighborhood. Because these are the clientele, there are people who were wanting to get better. There were exceptions to every rule. But when I think about that experience, it reminds me of the fear that can be felt by neighbors in close proximity to homeless sheltering. And, I really took to heart Chair Smith's comments about sort of the challenges that congregations face in wanting to do this, but not wanting to alienate their neighbors. And so I think as we move forward, we want to encourage more congregations to do this, and we have to help them by not creating a scenario that unnecessarily creates more fear in the neighborhood. And so when I think about the maximum of 4, and I hear some of my fellow commissioners, I do think that there should be a path to more than 4. And I was thinking of something like, every year you can add 2 up to a maximum of 8 or whatever maximum it is. But that way you have to start with 4 and let it operate. Let the neighborhood realize that it's not a problem. And then a small bump up if there's demand and the congregation wants to do it. And then maybe one more a year later after that. So that's one concept that maybe could, thread this needle without having to come back and amend the ordinance later. The ordinance does, incidentally, in its findings, it does talk about 4. So we'd have to look at that if we want to implement something like that. In terms of the density issue, one thing that occurred to me because I hadn't really thought about this geographically, and honestly, I don't think I have enough information to support 1,200 or any number, but I do think that we can help the council look at this if, when this goes to council, staff would prepare a map with all of the faith-based institutions and a 1,200-foot diameter radiating from each one of them, so that we could start to see, right, how much we're excluding if we do something like that. And so I would like them to, if it's the consensus of the commission, I'd like the council to know that we're interested, that we were interested enough in that possibility to have this data provided to them for them to consider without making a recommendation, let's do 1,200 or not. Those are my thoughts on how to adjust this ordinance as we recommend it to the council.
Thank you, Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to speak in favor of preferences, just in case we want to reconsider. Specifically, point number 1 is extremely important. If you have become unhoused suddenly, unexpectedly, and you're a student in the PAUSD, it's very disruptive to be kicked out while your parents try and figure out how to secure new housing. And it's disruptive not only, to their sense of stability, to their relationships, their schooling, but it's very financially valuable to be able to remain in this district. And so I just feel compassion. This has happened to several friends of mine that have lost their houses while their kids are in district, and they have had difficulty securing another one before the lease runs out because they get bumped or the landlord raises the rent in the middle of negotiations. So sometimes it takes longer than you think. And they do need a temporary place to be able to reside so that they can qualify to remain in the district. So I do accept that we currently are not at capacity and this isn't an issue. But if you look ahead, a lot of financial gurus are telling us that we're not out of the woods yet in terms of the economy. So we need to think about this and plan ahead and make sure that those children are protected. So that's my plea for that. Thank you.
I am not seeing other lights. I would say that I agree with my colleagues, and I certainly think of the preferences, the one that really stands out is school kids. So I wouldn't mind leaving that one in there. And I think it's kind of the practice anyway of people that work with these communities, but I think it doesn't hurt to spell it out. So I would be fine with that and leaving the others out for now. I don't think they're as compelling. And then I myself personally am not really concerned about the density issue, but given that others are, I would be perfectly happy to accept sort of a program as outlined by Commissioner Heckman. That sounds like a good compromise. And I really do like the idea of a map with churches. I would really want to see, and I think we could have come to a conclusion about that if we had thought of it in that way before, but I would like to see 600 versus 1,200, because 600 is the kind of accepted sphere of impact by projects that we currently accept. So that would be interesting for me to see. And I think that covers the issues for me.
If I could just drill down on the families with enrolled students concept, again, recognizing that this ordinance doesn't apply to the city, to property with RVs, right? This is only the places where people are in cars where I think we heard from our representative of Mr. Love, thank you, that you're generally not having children, right? These are, I don't know, he didn't say always, but nearly always a single occupant in a car. And so it's not a child. And so I'm just trying to think about whether this could actually, I mean, how does that work? If my congregation has this obligation to provide a preference to families with students, I think, first of all, I think they would normally do that if without being told. I think, protecting and helping children is the mission of every faith-based organization. But I'm wondering if there could be a situation here where something that we don't want to happen happens where, and I don't know what that would be. But anyway, that's my concern. And so I'm just voicing it. I don't generally have a problem with keeping that. But I'm wondering if there's a risk that we're not thinking of.
I'll just remind you that students can be homeless and students can be 18. So these are not mutually exclusive scenarios. And often in the case that I mentioned, which does happen frequently, if you're following any of these Palo Alto parents groups, like multiple times a month, we're seeing people displaced from their home. They don't have the RV yet. They're trying to find a house or an apartment or a place to rent. So those are people that would be in their cars as well. And even if they have a friend that their child can stay with, they still need the residency in order to stay in the district. And if the organizations are likely to comply anyway, they shouldn't object to this restriction.
Commissioner Aiken and then Commissioner Liu.
Yeah, just a brief observation about a map with 600-foot radius from faith-based institutions. You don't want to create something where the coverage is so high that it looks intimidating. We may have a relatively small number of congregations who are interested in doing this, and we would never run across any overlap. But if you provide a diagram of that sort, you may find that huge areas have overlap of one kind or another. And I wouldn't want that to dissuade council from considering liberalization of the rules we're proposing here.
Commissioner Liu?
Yeah.
Mike.
Thank you. A few thoughts. Just recapping a lot of the really good comments so far. On density, I have significant reservations about density restrictions. I think there's inherent value in having as many congregations as would like to participate, and a broader just network of people and institutions that can support people who participate in this program. On capacity, I think Commissioner Heckman's plan sounds totally reasonable to me. On preferences, I generally support preference 1. I think there's also value in preference 2, the preference for people who have lived in the community or who are involved in the local community. This is maybe an abstract concern now while there's still plenty of capacity, but I think it's likely that there could be just better outcomes for people net across the entire system if people can have safe parking near them, near their families, near communities that they've engaged in. So preference 2 could also just maximize the amount of good that our program can do. To throw one wrinkle here, when talking about families and how many participants currently are single people in a single passenger vehicle, we do have the option of accepting RVs. And there could be some trade-off, like you could have 4 passenger vehicles or 2 RVs or some fractional combination thereof. I can't think of a reason why RVs are inherently worse in any way, like that they're inherently louder, inherently, I don't know, more likely to lead to public safety incidents or anything like that. Maybe the only possible thing is that RVs are slightly taller and slightly more visible, but this feels like relatively moderate in the context of mostly large parking lots. So yeah, I'd like to throw that for people's consideration as well.
Commissioner Chang?
So as I'm listening to all the really comments, I want to remind us all that the operator said that there's no barrier to implementing these preferences. But then from a legislative perspective, there's no point putting rules in if they're unnecessary. It just makes for messy code. But I do also concur with Commissioner Templeton that the impact on students is going to be much larger than the impact on any other group that might be given preferences. And so even though it's not an issue right now, and even though this operator likely would prioritize families with children in PAUSD anyway, it's probably worthwhile because this is such an important point and is such an outsized impact on the lives of the program participants if they are enrolled in school here. I think Commissioner Liu brings up a really good point, and I wonder if it would be worthwhile to build in the flexibility to allow us to accommodate RVs. That said, I would defer to the operator. So there's a reason that the operator doesn't, it is difficult, possibly because it's also not very attractive, as Ms. Tanner mentioned, for RV owners to have to move their very large vehicle and find someplace else to put their very large vehicle every day. But that being said, if we want to think forward, there may be a reason to build in some flexibility, especially because there are some very large parking lots at some of the faith institutions that could easily accommodate RVs. So that's just a thought. I kind of like that idea if this is ordinance. We know how slow this process is. So by the time there's a need, I mean, this pilot was put in pre-pandemic, and now we're finally making it permanent. So by the time there's a need, it may be too late. So I wonder if we wouldn't want to maybe make that a possibility and make it one that where the congregation as well as the operator can always choose to utilize that space or not, but kind of leave it up to the congregation. And maybe we can put parameters around it, such as 2 for 1 or something like that. Thanks.
Commissioner Templeton?
Thank you. I also wanted to respond about whether or not RVs present more of a health hazard than cars. It's my understanding that yes, they do, because of the dumping of waste matter. Yeah, I'm talking about sewage. Yeah, so I was wondering if staff wanted to respond to that, and maybe it would help us move on past this issue. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think I would say certainly the issue of needing to discharge wastewater is present in RVs and not present in a typical vehicle. I think so there is, if that's not properly attended to, then that can become a problem, and unfortunately has in some communities in the recent past. Related to RV wastewater. I would say, just in terms of the vehicle limit overall, if the commission did want to give staff direction to, develop a clause that council could incorporate around allowing whether it's up to 8 vehicles max. Again, RVs are allowed. It's just, I think, programmatically not currently happening right now because of the program operators' preferences and kind of the way that how they feel it's best to serve folks who are living in RVs. So there could be a different operator that a church works with that does want to place RVs there. I will say also related to just the challenges that some congregations had to overcome with neighbors. That was often a discussion point of like, what kind of vehicles are going to be there, and having kind of regular cars, if you will, was more palatable than maybe having RVs. So just to say, RVs are allowed under the current ordinance. And if certainly we wanted to create a max, it doesn't mean the congregation has to serve that. So if Move Mountain View and the congregation felt 4 was fine, they wouldn't need to go up to 8, but they could have the flexibility under the ordinance to do so. That might be something that, especially if there are also proximity limitations, then we can still serve more people, but it just may not be at more congregations.
Thank you so much. And just wanted to see if there was anybody ready to make a motion.
Okay, I think that's my job, but that's okay. Thank you.
encouraging you all in all of our jobs. Thank you.
All right, since the current ordinance in the proposed ordinance doesn't preclude RVs, I won't be including a reference to that. I will move that the PTC recommend that the city council adopt the proposed amendments to Palo Alto Municipal Code, Title 18, Chapter 18.42 and 18.42160, recommended by staff and contained in attachment A to our staff report with the following modifications. Number one, delete the second preference, which is F12 2 little I, and modify the first to rather than say families with students, to just clarify it's students. So that could be either, it could be an individual 17, 18-year-old student, rather than family with, it could be both that way. So it would just modify to say students rather than families with students. Number two, modify the ordinance to create a path to increase the maximum number from 4 to 6 after 1 year of operation, and from 6 to 8 after 2 years, from 6 to 8 after 2 years of operation, with the same process applicable as the initial permit issuance. In other words, there would be appeal rights in that. Number three, clarify the use of the word amenities in subpart F14, consistent with our dialogue tonight. And finally, we would instruct the staff to provide a map to the city council showing radius of 600 and 1,200 feet from the faith-based institutions in Palo Alto to inform the council's dialogue on whether there should be any density limit.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a seconder. Would either of you like to speak to either the motion or the seconder?
I don't need to.
Okay. Okay, any other observations, comments? Okay, I think that we are ready to vote then on this motion. Ms. Dow, if you would call the vote, please.
Can I just add a clarifying question just to make sure I
Okay.
captured it correctly? For deleting the preference, so I got the part about updating the preference, and then to delete the second preference.
There's actually a typo, I think, in the ordinance where the second, third, and fourth preferences are all lumped into little
Right, and
Roman
that's what,
2.
right. So I just want to make sure you're saying delete all of little Roman numeral I, which says starts with the second preference, but includes actually more than.
Right, delete 2 little I.
Got it. Great. In this entirety. Thank you.
Commissioner Aiken,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Commissioner Liu,
Yes.
Chair Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton,
Yes.
motion carries 6-0.
Wonderful, thank you very much. We will move on to.
Sorry, I just want to clarify the record. I'm sorry, I was distracted. Thank you, commissioners, for voting, but technically we'll note that you were in support, but the PTC is actually taking the action on the item today. So thank you for your votes, but I think that they're not actually voting on it because the PTC has the authority to make the recommendation to the council. I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Yes,
Okay.
that's why we were voting.
Okay, great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, thank you for that. So we will now move on to our second study session of the evening, which is on a retail study, introduction and check-in.
Thank you, Ms. Tanner. It's nice to see you back here.
Yes, thank you. It's great to be here and good to see you all. Thank you.
Okay. So we are ready for a staff report on item 4.
Or perhaps could we do the reports from official?
Oh, I forgot about that. Thank you.
Raphael at the ready,
Yes.
but I'll start. Amy French, Chief Planning Official, giving you just a bit of an update. You know, I provide the report in the packet about upcoming Planning and Transportation Commission meetings, so you have those dates. Just a quick report out. This week, Council heard the Stanford University Medical Center Development Agreement modifications. That was Monday. Upcoming, let's see, who is November? Is it Alan with a backup representing Planning and Transportation Commission? And so we have, let's see, several meetings. I count 3 meetings in November at Council where we may like to have representation if that's not overdoing it. We have the Ellsworth Place action item, the planned community, Middlefield/Ellsworth 2 planned communities. Going for action on that date. A couple of, we have the electrification equipment, that's just a consent item with a modification, so that's nothing, second reading. We have on November 13th, the comp plan amendment implementation ordinance that you all saw a month or so ago. 575 Los Trancos is a site and design application, the one with the pool near the creek, for action. Then on November 27th, we're looking at the rental registry. It's an action item as well. So that's November. And then, of course, this item is scheduled, the safe parking is scheduled to go in December to Council. Safe parking, I am going to look and see who's on for December. Well, you know who you are, right? Okay, George. So that's on the docket. We also have the downtown housing master plan. It's a consent item that month. And looking to possibly bring the SB9 standards, which are the housing standards that Council saw before. You all saw the ordinances, and we're tweaking the standards after 3 or 4 visits with the ARB, after 3 or 4 meetings with a focus group. And then again, looking forward to next year, which we don't have to talk about now. I can wait.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other staff wanting to give us a report or update?
Believe Raphael is
Not here.
tuned in. Oh, was chatting with him.
I don't see him.
No, he was on earlier, but
Yeah.
I think he left, wasn't
He's
sure.
been off and on.
Well, that's okay. We
Hard to
can,
catch up to us.
then we can move on with the staff report for item 4.
Great. I am going to introduce, I'm trying to see if they are online. Do we have Sarabia and Dan? Yes, okay. Sarabia. So this is, we have a presentation. I don't know if.
Dan
Veronica-
is an attendee, not a participant. I don't know if. he
Oh,
needs to
might
be-
need to raise him up. I see
Oh,
Sarabia.
okay. Thank you.
So last, just an overview, quick overview, and you've seen the report. About this time last year, maybe it was even earlier, end of August, we brought forward the interim ordinance on the thresholds for CUPs and all of that. It went to Council as an extension of the interim ordinance because we didn't have our retail study ready. And so we had started that process. Then there was Street Sense came along, and we do also have representation. I have to ping him as well. Steve is going to be attending this if you have questions on that. But Street Sense came along, and we had a Street Sense presentation with Council in June. They approved that in so many words. And then we're kind of back at it with our retail study that is informed by Street Sense and has an expanded scope from last fall when we got our first version of it. So without further ado, I'm going to ping Steve and let Sarabia do her presentation. Sarabia? Sarabi?
Amy, did you elevate Dan as well to the panelist?
Yes, I've been elevated. I've been promoted to panelist. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wary from Michael Baker International. I just want to check, do you guys have our presentation or should I share my screen?
Whoever's, somebody needs to share.
You have the presentation, Dan? Or?
Well, just very short PowerPoint, just very short. Yes. We have 7 slides, so I can set that up very quickly. And let me just make sure I've got this. I'll share screen. So I was going to present the first few slides, and I was going to hand it off to Serby to conclude, and then we'll be available for Q&A. And let me just make sure I've got the right. Tell me when you get the right screen here. Should be this one. Okay. You see our slide?
Yes, Dan.
Okay, great. Okay. Again, good evening. I'm Dan Wary from Michael Baker International. Serby and I are here. We're the kind of lead on your team here. We've been working with staff for quite a while. And what we wanted to do is just kind of present and introduce the retail recovery study. We started a while ago, and we can give you a little bit of update. We've got some preliminary work that we've done so far, but we just kind of wanted to introduce you overall to the project. The goal of the study is to retain, strengthen, and facilitate retail in the key commercial areas of Palo Alto, really trying to retain and recover the thriving retail activity. And one key component of this is to modernize the regulations and ensure a vibrant commercial area. So just real quick, we'll jump along. We want to look at the study area. So these are all kind of the primary commercial areas in Palo Alto. Our focus is really on 4 key areas centered on University Avenue, California Avenue, Midtown Shopping Center, and the retail components or zones on El Camino Real, primarily on the kind of east and west of the intersection with California Avenue. Those are the CN and CS zones. And then just kind of what what's in the study that we're doing and what are the main components. So we're looking at best practice research. We looked around and we're benchmarking all good practices relating to retail recovery and good retail practices in general. We've studied the retail trends and analyses. They've been evolving, as you know, quite a bit. Peer city interviews and research. We started off with a couple. We just finished a 3rd peer city review. So again, looking at our best practices and then more locally how those local examples that may apply more specifically to Palo Alto. And then stakeholder interviews as well. We're shooting for about 12. We've got about 7 so far. And we're looking for some more. And then doing a constraints analysis on your zoning and procedures, deep dive. And then other components include, and these are some of the newer things that we've added on more recently, is to look at the impacts of AB 2097, which eliminates minimum parking requirements within a half mile of high frequency transit, particularly at train stations. So that covers virtually all of University and California districts. And then incorporating the Street Sense Economic Development Strategy report that was just concluded and completed. So we've seen a lot of what we saw in our preliminary analysis was really heavily documented and explained in the Street Sense report. So that's very nice to see that there's a lot of synergy between those, and we'll be incorporating that into our final report. And then ultimately, the goal of this is to make recommended land use changes, land use zoning controls, regulatory changes We are also been asked to look at parking, again, because of AB 2097 in particular, but also because parking in general is often a critical component to all your retail components. And then we have scope and budget for a number of meetings with the PTC, and then also up to 2 meetings with the City Council. And then ultimately, when we work through that, we'll have a final report. So we do expect to be back with you as we make further progress and have more detailed findings. But we're going to kind of give you just an overview tonight. And then I think Serby was going to cover a little bit more detail, the outreach.
Sure. Hi, I'm Surbi. I'm an urban planner with Michael Baker. Here to work with Dan to get this retail recovery study done. So as far as outreach is concerned, to date, we have done 7 business and property owners interviews, and we've also, this also includes Chamber of Commerce. We have documented the interviews, and we will create a memo of the findings for these interviews. Along with that, we have also done interviews of neighboring cities of Redwood City and Mountain View City in the first round, the preliminary report. And we have recently interviewed the peer city of Santa Monica, and we will be doing research of their zoning code based on this interview as well, and we'll be creating a memo of all these interviews and submitting it to the city soon. Next slide, please.
Yep, here we go.
So we've put together a tentative schedule for this project. We had our kickoff meeting with the city staff in July. And as I said, we are in the process of doing stakeholder interviews. We've done a few, but we hope to wrap up the stakeholder interviews by the end of November, if possible. We have wrapped up the interviews with the peer cities and neighboring cities, and we will submit a memo hopefully by October end or mid-November. The best practices, we documented that in the first round. We will revise that and resubmit it to the city by the end of November. And we've just started parking analysis. We're collecting data and trying to figure out what data is available from the city. And then we'll design the parking analysis based on the data available. As far as zoning review and recommendations are concerned, we hope to start that beginning of December and have recommendations by the end of March, and simultaneously work on preparation of reports starting February. And by the end of April, we'll have a report with recommendations for changes to zoning and parking. We have in our scope identified about 6 PTC meetings, and this is first of the 6 PTC meeting, and we hope to return in January for the update of the work done so far. And the adoption hearings we're hoping will be sometime in May and June. So that will be the tentative schedule. This might change a little bit based on how the project progresses, but this is what the schedule is as for now. So with that, I think we're ready to take questions.
Okay. So that concludes the presentation, I guess. So I guess we need questions. And I see that Commissioner Aiken's light is on.
Thank you. I'm not sure how much detail you want to get into at this level, but one question that I know will come up is in analyzing parking resources, how much use you make of the residential parking areas near downtown. This has been a contentious subject in the past, and we have a residential parking preference program in effect there, which is somewhat unusual in that commercial permits in the residential neighborhoods are permitted in a limited way. But I'm curious as to what your thinking is at the moment about whether you will count those areas as parking resources, and if so, in what way?
As of now, we're collecting the
Was on
data.
mute.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the data that we have collected so far is focused on the garages, the city garages, and the on-street parking. And the main idea of parking analysis is to understand how much development the University Avenue or California Avenue can absorb without parking in light of AB 2097 before figuring out certain parking strategies for additional development. So the study will focus on what that threshold would be, at what time the city needs to intervene and implement certain parking strategies or CDM strategies.
Thank you. I just wondered if you were aware that there was this history of already using adjacent areas as parking resources. Mm-hmm. And so if you do a census strictly on the basis of garage space and on-street parking in the downtown commercial district, that won't be an accurate reflection of how parking resources in the area are used. Particularly as AB 2097 comes into play, there would, I presume, there would be additional pressure to use parking resources other than those two types you've identified, other than the garages and the on-street parking in the commercial district. Mm-hmm. So I think that really needs to be a part of your analysis. I can't offer you advice as to what the correct way to do that is, but it is an issue that you should keep in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciate that. I apologize. I started responding and I had myself on mute, but what I was trying to say earlier and to build on what Serby said is we had a good intensive meeting with the staff this week on that and looking at all the resources. And one of the things that we do have is that permit data. So we're looking at the residential permits and the commercial permits and trying to track that. And then there's some really good survey data. Some of it's a little bit older, where it's very comprehensive, and we have a good inventory of the on-street spaces throughout, including the side streets as well. And so we'll be taking a look at all of that.
Right. So when you say the side streets, you mean including all parking permit district areas?
I believe, yeah, everything that we've got data from, we're going to look at, and I believe we have that not just for Cal Ave and University in particular, but the surrounding areas that include the RPP.
Good. And this is above my pay grade, but I understand the parking assessment districts have complex issues involved as well. So a simple census of space won't capture those. So you need to be aware of those as well. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. That's it for now.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Chang.
Yes, so I wanted to understand how, so the 12 stakeholders are up, it says in our packet that those will be selected by city staff. And so I was wondering how city staff has decided.
There was a list that was developed in consultation with the Director of Planning and Development Services and perhaps Mr. Guagliardo can weigh in on this. He is also attending the meeting to develop how that list of names was developed in consultation with the consultant.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning and Transportation Commission. Steve Guagliardo, Assistant to the City Manager. Happy to answer the question. We were trying to come up with a spread of stakeholders that represented the various retail elements operating in town. We do have that list that's been provided to Michael Baker. And then as they alluded to, I believe they've made contact with most, but not all of them. as we continue to kind of work through that list, we'll certainly work with Michael Baker to make sure they're able to get contact with what we feel is a significant, not statistically significant, but a representative sample of those different retail sectors so we can make sure we go forward.
Okay, thank you. Am I also correct in understanding that the peer city interviews and research is now completed, so there's no opportunity to like give feedback on the selection of those cities?
My understanding is the only city that was interviewed to date has been Santa Monica, but Surabhi, can you weigh in as far as those other cities noted?
Yes, so the other cities were Redwood City and Mountain View, and these are the neighboring cities. We compared, we interviewed them regarding their zoning code, their parking policies, their ground floor retail, their permit processes. So we've interviewed those two cities and Santa Monica, but we can work with city staff if there are other peer cities that you would want to identify.
Okay, I do have comments, but I'll save those for later on.
Commissioner Liu?
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead.
He was first.
Okay, thank you. A few questions and maybe a couple of comments sprinkled in too. Just to confirm, where does the transit analysis fit in here? The packet mentions that there'd be discussion of pedestrian access and biking. Is that like lumped into the parking scope?
So not exactly. So what we are doing is we're using Street Sense report, which points out various strategies for pedestrian and transit improvement and micromobility improvement, and we'll be integrating that report with our report. But our main focus would be to analyze the ordinance, the zoning ordinance, and parking. But the rest of it would be from the Street Sense report.
Got it. I think, well, I have comments on that, but I can save more for later. I think it does make sense to consider pedestrian, cycle, public transit access as kind of first-class access as well. A question about the stakeholder interviews. Are we also going to interview landlords?
Yes, so we have interviewed a few developers in our first round. And this round, I think the main focus is on the business owners. The first round, it was a few landlords that we interviewed.
I think there is a strong case for landlord interviews. In many areas, there are storefronts that previously had successful businesses, but have been empty for years because the economics of renovating and renting it out have not worked for the landlords. And I think understanding and kind of working backwards from what it would actually take to get those spaces leased back out is a really important question for me, at least. And I'll hold more comments until later. Thank you.
Commissioner Heckman?
Thank you. So one of the written comments we received urged that the study sort of separately look at restaurants and other kinds of retail because there are different drivers and motivations and paths to success for those two different models. The scope of services doesn't specifically call out that you'll be doing that. I suspect you will be, but I wanted to, confirm that is part of the plan, or learn that it's not. You're going to lump all retail together.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that. Thank you. The definition of retail is somewhat unique in Palo Alto, so that's one issue we're looking at, but also looking at all the other associated uses. So in our initial studies, we are looking at retail and office, retail-like retail supportive, and other, kind of uses that can, and will support the overall vitality of the area. So, we'll be looking at kind of the full range of mix as it affects overall vitality of the corridors.
Including restaurants?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. All right, the next question, and this might be what Commissioner Liu asked, but I didn't really understand the question, so let me ask it a different way. We received a number of written comments from citizens wanting to make sure that part of this study looked at bikeability and walkability of our retail centers. And in fact, when you look at the staff report, it's reflecting on the Street Sense report, where the second of the three guiding principles that emerged from the Street Sense study was improve accessibility by embracing walking and biking solutions to from within all the city's commercial districts and addressing parking policies and systems. So again, looking at your scope of work, there's references to parking, but no references to biking or walking. I did see in one of Dan's slides that part of your process is going to be to integrate the Street Sense report, which does highlight the importance of these things. But maybe you could, but I did want to clarify that this access by means other than vehicle will be a part of your study, or tell me it won't be.
Yeah, that it wasn't specifically looking at that, but it is one of the overall kind of trends and best practices, is making sure that there's a strong emphasis on all modes of activity. It's not just cars. Obviously, parking is a big part of it to get people in. But again, these are in many ways kind of serving the immediate neighborhoods as well, so that pedestrian access and bringing in bike activity even from broader areas will certainly be a critical function. So we will look at the facilities and things there, how it's accommodated in terms of the physical kind of streetscape. But that it was our focus has been primarily on looking at the zoning and procedures and those other best practices. We have identified, again, in our initial best practices analysis, making sure that physical access through all modes, including bikes and pedestrians, is included. So it may be more of that kind of higher level. I don't think we don't have the scope to specifically look at streetscape design, other than just kind of generally. But there's no. There could be some design recommendations very generally, but
yeah, but the full-fledged study is not included in the part of the scope, which could be a next step of this project. Like we could recommend a study of the improvements to the streetscape.
Okay, thank you.
I'm also really concerned and glad that Commissioner Aiken mentioned it about the residential parking permit programs downtown, and also to let you know that they exist around California Avenue too. And your map showed the California Avenue Business District actually going south all the way to Page Mill, which it doesn't do. It's just California Avenue, yeah, because there's a residential neighborhood there called Mayfield. So you don't have that whole purple area to count the parking in. So I wanted to let you know that. And we did get a number of, Commissioner Heckman already mentioned it, letters about bike and ped, and also ADA. And one of the letters emphasized ADA considerations. So I think that would be very important to include in here. And I wanted to ask, in the report that council considered in August, accepted, there is I believe, a list from Street Sense of their stakeholder interviewees. And I'm hoping that your interviews will include more small businesses and, as Commissioner Liu mentioned, landlords also. This list doesn't really capture what I would think would be as helpful as talking to more business owners that operate in all of our business districts. That's all for me for now. Commissioner Aiken?
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify one thing I may have misunderstood. So as I read the packet here, we were focusing on parking rather than including bike, ped, ADA, and as part of scope of work, specifically because we're talking about, because you are talking to the PTC and zoning is one of our critical functions, and zoning for parking is where this comes into play for us. The other issues are not being ignored. They're simply not being brought to us as part of this particular piece of work. So is that understanding correct, or approximately so?
I think that's a fair assessment. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other lights. Oh, Commissioner Chang?
And so for comments, because I think that was just clarifying questions, right? Do we need to take public?
I don't think
Is there any public?
This is a study session, so taking public testimonies.
Nobody here. There's no one.
Is fine.
Yeah, there's no.
Could ask.
Okay, so there's no public commenters. All right, on to comments then. So I was looking at the peer cities and was really hoping that we would, if I look at the different retail areas that are covered by this project, there's downtown, there's CalLab, there's El Camino, and Middlefield. Is that correct? Those four. And I'm not sure that just Mountain View and Redwood City would necessarily be the right peer cities. So one thought I had was Los Altos could be really applicable when we start looking at how perhaps, say, CalAv might look. Yeah, so that was one thought. And then we also have a few, I don't know if there's the opportunity to just look at a few other cities. So if we look at the demographics of Palo Alto and where that's headed, it's pretty different from, say, Redwood City right now, I believe. I haven't looked at the demographics carefully. But if you look at some of the retail operations that are starting to happen in Sunnyvale and Cupertino, it may be worth looking at what is appealing to those demographics as well. And then finally, if we're looking at Southern California, I think about Pasadena as well as Santa Monica. So that's just my comment. I think that it may make sense to do a slightly broader look other than just Redwood City and Mountain View.
Yeah. And I think to be clear that when we first started, we were just kind of, I think we started with more proximity, just kind of looking at Mountain View to begin with. And not that they were saying, they were, directly comparable in terms of all other aspects, like Palo Alto. It's hard to do, but Mountain View and Redwood City, we had made initial outreach to them. There were several other that I think we looked at, but we had some really good interviews that were very helpful. And still the trends and their practices were consistent with what, we were thinking. And then we just added Santa Monica because that was identified as more of a comparable, directly comparable example. So if Steph wants to look at some others, we can talk about doing Sunnyvale or Cupertino or Los Altos or even Pasadena.
Commissioner Aiken? No?
Pardon me, I didn't realize I'd hit my switch. I do have a question, but I don't know that it's my turn.
Go ahead.
Okay, this is regarding stakeholder interviews. Of course, there's great concern about change in the retail economic environment because of online sales, for example. But we do know of a number of instances of businesses that have relocated out of Palo Alto, yet are still doing well. And I would be very interested in knowing, since economically they seem to be viable businesses, what led them to move from Palo Alto. So as a stakeholder interview candidate, businesses that fit into that category might be of interest. Number one on my personal list would be University Art. But there have been several of this type, and I'm sure we can put together a list in some way. Thank you.
It's a great idea.
Commissioner Liu, did you want to make your comments?
Yeah, I had a question first, actually. So when on packet page 50, when discussing formula and chain store regulations, you describe it as a quantitative analysis of whether these regulations are beneficial. What do you mean by the quantitative analysis, and what would that actually look like?
And pull that up here. I opened earlier. Can you just rephrase which section you were referring to? Were you looking at the
task
scope?
five. Task 5, the second bullet point, quantitative analysis of whether these regulations are beneficial. Okay. What's a quantitative analysis in this context?
Regulations, that's a good question, actually. I'm trying to find that, and unfortunately, it's not opening up here for me. Let's see. I'll look at it in context here and pull it up. I think I may have closed that. In terms of the regulations and quantitatively, I think one of the things we're going to be looking at, as Survey mentioned in terms of parking, for example, is just looking at the ratios in terms of how much capacity there is, looking at the kind of the overall, look at your development standards versus actual usage. That's what we're trying to get a handle on. We can kind of calibrate those, evaluate those also against industry standards and make sure that contemporary, see how things are trending and changing. So we'll look at, again, just as an example for parking, city standards, actual use rates, as best we can tell, and then also like ULI, Urban Land Institute, and Institute for Transportation Engineers regularly publish and update standards. And so that will be one thing to calibrate and look at. The other thing that we had also been looking at was looking at the actual occupancy rates and trying to track those over time with a variety of different sources, and try to see how those trends and correlate that with the regulations. And then also, I don't think we can necessarily quantify and say, if you make this change in your standard or regulation, you're going to have this economic result. That's why that phrasing was kind of confusing. But we are looking at where, for example, peer cities and other best practices, what results they've had as after they've made changes. So that's probably what that's referring to. Is if we're able to quantify and say, after making certain technical changes or procedural changes, whether they're temporary or permanent, if they can show, hey, we've generated a number of or attracted new business, we've retained uses, we've increased foot traffic, perhaps increased sales. So where that data is available, we'll try and pull that in. I believe the Street Sense study actually has some really good information that we're hoping to pull in along that line.
Great, that's some feedback maybe.
Kind of a circular long answer, but I think ultimately, wherever we can, we'll try to provide objective information to the extent possible.
Yeah, if we can actually establish a trend in similar cities that have formula or chain retail restrictions and have a sense of the impact on rent or just overall occupancy of commercial spaces, I think that's useful data. This might be implied, but just to be explicit, I think that there's inherent value in independent and local retail. And so that's kind of the direction I would look at like these regulations from. Okay, maybe just a couple of quick comments. I also second considering Los Altos as a peer city to investigate. They have many kinds of independent local retail, clothing stores, thrift shops, toy stores, like a sewing store that are less and less common in Palo Alto, but they've seemingly been able to preserve them. And I think looking at strategies, if any, that they've employed to actually preserve local businesses is like definitely in scope of any kind of peer city analysis. I'm also still not totally clear what the bike or pedestrian or ADA access would look like in the final report. I understand that parking falls under zoning, but bike access, transit, bike parking very much also falls under transportation. I'm not sure if there's more to like tease out here, but I would just emphasize that to the extent possible, we should include that in like, we should just include that in the scope. Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Chang, did you have another question? No. Okay. I was going to ask you about a slide that showed you coming to us in the new year monthly. Is that true?
Yes.
As needed, but yeah, up to 6 meetings, I think, is what we had scoped. And so some of these may be, short updates, and others might be, more detailed in terms of an in-depth presentation in terms of, findings or at least preliminary findings and recommendations. So I think they can vary, but sorry, Surabhi, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say that some of these might be just like updates. Say, for example, in Jan, we might come back and give you an update on stakeholder interviews and peer city interviews, whereas in February or March, we could do a much more deeper dive of what the findings are from the zoning code and what recommendations we are trying to provide.
Okay. I am not seeing lights from my colleagues, and I'm wondering if you have received enough feedback from us, or if we've received enough, or if we're, I think we'll all be looking forward to seeing this when you have more specific data.
Yes, yeah, we'll be happy to share that. And hopefully we've given you an introduction. The idea was really just to kind of introduce ourselves and introduce the project briefly. And you've given us some good ideas, and then we'll go back and speak with your staff and work on those. So that it was very helpful.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what we were looking for, is just to really kind of kick this off and get this initiated. And then as we really get into the depths of analysis, we hope to be back. If we've got questions for you, we hope to come back. And again, as we have more information to present, we'll come back and speak with you.
Okay. And to incorporate some of my colleagues' ideas about Los Altos, I think you also find some of the successful businesses that left Palo Alto actually went to Los Altos. And so I think would be a very interesting interesting information to get. Do my colleagues have any other comments, or Commissioner Chang?
Just one more plug for Los Altos. So a couple other things that no, I mean, really, because when I look at Mountain View and Redwood City, they are different in certain ways. But if we look at El Camino, the length of El Camino is very different depending on where you are, right? It's in Santa Clara, it's entirely different from Atherton, entirely different from Palo Alto. And so I do think that incorporating some Los Altos into there may help. And we think about how to revitalize our section of El Camino. And similarly, Los Altos has some interesting programming. I think on Thursday nights, maybe first Fridays or something like that. So again, something else to look at there too. Thanks.
That's a really good one. And if you've got examples of those businesses that have gone, I know you mentioned, what was it, the University Yard? If there's any others, specifically that kind of detail is really helpful.
Shady Lane, a little bit longer ago, they've relocated to Menlo Park.
No new
And
books.
Paper Whirl, which I believe is in Los Altos.
Okay, Shady Lane, Paper
Whirl, WHIRL.
There's others that
Rural.
have gone to Redwood City as well from Palo Alto. I live there.
Okay.
Yes.
There was a third one there that I heard before Paper World. Or
Paper Whirl.
Whirl.
No new books.
No new books. Okay.
Dragon-
University Arts went to Redwood City.
Yeah.
So there's
Dragon Theater went to Redwood City.
Shady Lane also moved and stayed open, as did the,
Nature Gallery.
they just,
Nature Gallery, which also
Nature Gallery,
also
that's
went to
one.
Los Altos.
So it's kind of sad when we see our businesses leaving that are successful elsewhere and close by. We might be, we'll email you if we can think of more.
Yeah, that kind of data is really helpful.
Okay. Commissioner Aiken?
Thank you. I just wanted to put a placeholder in, since one of the big zoning issues we have to deal with is what might be done for increasing height limits in FAR in downtown, as street sense identified population increase as a possible retail booster. I'm not going to get into this because it's a far more complex issue than we have time to deal with tonight, but that certainly falls within our purview. It involves some complex analysis with return to work, as well as, according to the last data I've seen from joint venture, Silicon Valley is still increasing its employment, even if its overall population is stable or declining. So you might expect jobs downtown to be replaced even if there is no return to work, because companies are still expanding. So all of that has to be taken into account in the trade-offs for increasing density through zoning. Thank you.
Okay, I am not seeing any other lights, so unless anybody wants to add anything, I think we are through here. Thank you very much, Dan. And so, I'm sorry. So Robbie, for presenting this evening, and we'll see you next year.
Yes, great. Happy holidays, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye. Okay. We have one set of minutes, I believe, to approve, and that is the draft verbatim and summary minutes of September 13th. Do I have a motion?
Move approval as revised.
Seconder?
Second.
Okay, I don't think anyone needs to speak to it, so if you could conduct the vote, please, Ms. Dow.
Chair Suma,
Yes?
Commissioner Liu,
Yes.
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Aiken,
Yes.
motion carries 5-0.
Thank you very much. If we have any commissioner comments, questions, or announcements, go ahead.
Just a reminder to my fellow commissioners to please email your lists and tell your people to fill out the survey for safe. Oh my goodness, it's late. Safe systems, for the safe systems work, the new traffic safety work that Sylvia Starlag presented to us last week, because the only way to capture the near misses is through that survey, and that's critical to our work. We've been asking for it for a long time, asking for that information a long time, and so I think it's incumbent upon us to reach out to our networks and get people to submit that survey.
Yep. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, then I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.